In this video, we're going to talk about creating boundary surfaces by using projected curves. Now, we've talked about using 2D sketches and 3D sketches already, but there's another type of curve that I like to use when creating complicated surfaces, and that's using a projected curve. And this typically takes two different 2D sketches and projects them out normal to their plane and creates the resulting curvature. Now, we'll get a little bit more into how that actually happens, but let's start by trying to recreate the hood of this Nissan 350Z. The first thing I like to do is create a curve that's on my mirror plane. So if you'll notice, we're only drawing half of the car. So on my right plane, I'm going to start a new sketch and start drawing a spline. We're going to go to the back of the hood and all the way to the front where we have a changing curvature. And then I'm going to modify the spline handles until I get the curvature that matches the drawing. Now, since this is my mirror plane, what I'm going to do is extrude the surface out. So that way I have curvature that when I create my boundary surface, I can make a tangency relation with. And I also have some endpoints to grab onto when I'm creating some more top-down 2D splines. So next we want to sketch on the top plane and take a look at the back edge of the hood. Again, we're going to draw a spline and we're going to take it all the way out to this edge of the fender. Now we want to make sure that the spline both intersects and has tangency with the extruded surface we created. This is going to ensure that when we mirror the surface across our midplane, that we have good continuity between the two halves. We don't accidentally create a ridge in the middle of the hood that's not really there. So next we need to modify the spline handles to match the curvature. All right, so now we've created this curve from our top-down image, but we need to create it from our front image as well. So we're going to start a sketch on the front plane. And in this case, I want to hide the back blueprint view because it's going to be obscuring us. And I also want to hide some of the surfaces that have already been created, just to make sure we're not accidentally grabbing some curvature we don't mean to. So I'm going to start a new spline. And again, we're going to use the end of our extruded surface there. But we need to make sure that the endpoint matches up with that top-down sketch that we already created. So I'm going to take that top-down sketch, use convert entities, and then I'm going to convert this to construction. This allows me to make a relation between the endpoints to ensure that they're vertical. We also want to make sure that we have a tangency between the edges of these. Now, even though these don't lie in the same plane, we can create that tangency because we have the intersection between its endpoints. So this looks pretty good. So next I want to go ahead, hop out of that sketch, and we're going to create our first projected curve. From our curves dropdown, we use projected curve, making sure that we're on sketch option. And then we want to grab the two curves we created. So you'll notice the yellow preview on the screen. Once we select OK, we have a blue curve that's created. This curve intersects the back edge of that extruded surface, and it also has tangency with it. So you can see that this is a good way to create that curve out in 3D. So let's go ahead and make a few more curves and try to complete this hood. Again, let's go ahead and do a top-down sketch. And I want to take this curve and I'm going to convert it. This is something that I like to do to make sure that I have the geometry to snap to or create relations with. You do have to be careful because after you convert this, you still have the option to drag this geometry around. And obviously that's not what you want to do. You don't want to modify curvature that's there. The reason I like to do this is because when I'm using the projected curve in a sketch, if you don't convert it, you don't have access to those endpoints as easily. So let's draw a new spline. I'm going to just snap to that point, and I'm going to drag it out in space. Now remember that we're creating a spline or some curvature that's going to match this front section here. And even though we don't have a line on our drawing, we can kind of tell where the curvature is going. So because we're dealing with this, I'm going to draw another spline, snapping to the edge of our extruded surface and over to the endpoint of the spline we just drew. I'm going to make sure that this has tangency. And then I want to make sure that it matches the curvature of both the edge of our fender and the front of our bumper. So as you can see, the edge of our bumper here is actually twisting a little bit in space. So we're going to make sure that we do our best to match that curvature. Now what we need to do here is make sure that one or the other of these curves is actually a construction curve, and then we can simply use it in another sketch. So I'm going to turn this front curve into a construction curve, but we're keeping it there to make sure that we have a point in space that we can reference. So next we can either decide to do this from our front view or from our side view. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and use the side view because that's the same view we used for the other section of our hood, and draw a new curve. So again, we're going to take this, convert entities, and then make it construction. But we also need to take this edge and make that construction as a converted entities as well. So looking at this from the side, we're drawing a new spline. From this point, make sure that it intersects with this edge vertically. So now we just need to match the curvature and location of that endpoint to make sure that it's either horizontal or close to where we want it for that front curve. So it looks like from the picture, it actually raises up a little bit. So I'm going to leave it a little bit higher than this point. So we need to tweak this curvature just a little bit more to make sure that it matches the curvature that we see in our blueprint image. Once everything looks pretty good, we can hit OK and create another projected curve. So you'll notice one thing that happens is it's actually creating a yellow preview curve back here. And the reason for that is because we actually have some extra geometry in here. So you'll notice from our top-down view, sketch 27, I did not make this construction. So you have to be real careful when you're converting entities and actually make sure that they're creating construction geometry. So now we can grab the side and the top view, and the preview on the screen looks like what we wanted. Our points intersect in space, so that's always a good sign. So let's go back to sketch 27 and make that visible and create a new sketch on our top plane. Grab that front curve that we created and convert that. So this time we don't need to create a construction version of this because this is the actual curve that we want to use. So we hit OK, and now we can either create a side sketch or a front sketch to finish off this geometry. So I'm going to convert entities, make it construction, and then again create a spline. The spline's going to snap to the edge of our extruded surface, and then we're going to create some tangency between those. Now we can create one more projected curve. Now you'll notice that the preview on the screen is not looking right. So you need to make sure that sketch 27 is hidden because what it's actually doing is trying to select sketch 27 as opposed to sketch 29. So you can see now we've got the preview and all the geometry is correct. So let's hide a few of these blueprints and take a look at creating the actual surface. So now we want to create a boundary surface. Our direction 1 selection is going to be the edge of our extruded surface and the projected curve that's out on the edge of our hood. Direction 2 is going to be the back edge of the hood and the front edge of the hood. So one thing we want to make sure that we do here is select edge 1, use our drop-down box, and create a tangency to face reference. The rest of the curves don't need to have any direction or tangency references because the curvature that we use to create them is going to be the curvature that's going to define them in 3D space. But because we're mirroring this hood about the center line, we need to make sure that that tangency relation is there. So the hood is created. All of our 3D curves can be hidden now, and we can mirror this across our right plane. So now we've created the front hood of our 350Z. So we've made some good progress on creating the geometry to help define this car, and we did that by using 3D projected sketches rather than creating a 3D sketch or multiple planes in 2D sketches to try to replicate some of this geometry.